Well, good morning again. I think I say this every time I stand up to speak at St Bride's, but sharing like this is both a privilege and a profoundly terrifying experience. It's a privilege to be invited to share something of my thoughts, reflections and faith with friends, fellow pilgrims and people I'm yet to meet. It's a privilege I do not take lightly. It is also profoundly terrifying because if I am to do this well and with authenticity, I need to not just share my thoughts and reflections, an academic exercise, but to stand vulnerable in this place and share something of myself as a person, not something that comes naturally to me. There is always also so much you can say, so much I could say, so many different ways of approaching a topic, which are ultimately incomplete. We've only got 15 minutes max. But today's liturgy is also part of that sharing, an attempt to use words, symbols, ideas to help us awaken and stretch towards an elusive truth. It's just always that little bit outside of our grasp. As I said earlier, today's additionally scary because although you may find this difficult to believe, I've never offered a reflection at Open Table. And I've been part of it for 9.5 years. So it's a bit of a first, and I've held back, as Open Table is never to be about me or to be seen as my project, because that will be the death of it. It has to be about the extraordinary people that make up that community. Now, through complete coincidence, our joint celebration today is marking All Saints' Day. I thought, that gives me some ideas. Now, All Saints' Day is a day in the church calendar which is celebrated in honour of all the saints, known and unknown, it says. And in the British Isles, the date of the 1st of November was being celebrated as All Saints as early as the 700s. And as often in these isles, it took over a pagan festival called Samhain, a Celtic festival, the Festival of the Dead. So remembering our dead. It's not a new concept. It's the way we read it. Now, the concept of saints within the Christian tradition is a rather mixed affair, depending on which tradition you come from. But a saint generally tends to be a person who's recognised as having an exceptional degree of holiness or likeness or closeness to God. Now, depending on the context again and the denomination, the term also keeps its original Christian meaning as any believer who is in Christ, as it says in the 1 Peter. Now, in the Anglican, Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Lutheran and traditions, all of the faithful deceased, again it says, are considered to be saints. But some are considered worthy of greater honour. Official church recognition and consequently veneration is given to some saints through the process of canonisation in the Roman Catholic Church or glorification in the Eastern Orthodox Church. In the more avowedly Protestant traditions, like the one I grew up in, all believers, alive or dead, were referred to as saints, and that was it. You didn't need a special process, and it was all considered a bit odd. But the English word saint actually comes from the Latin sanctus. And that Latin word translates a Greek word, because of course the New Testament was written in Greek, which is the Greek word is hagios. And it comes from the verb hagiazo, which means to set apart, to sanctify, to make holy. So we're setting people apart, as saying that they're something particularly in their lives to look at. But many other religions use the same concept, but use different terminology, of course, although it's beginning to blur in the English language, to venerate persons worthy of some honour. The Jesuit author John Coleman wrote that saints across various cultures and religions have the following similar kind of things. So one is an exemplary model, or an extraordinary teacher, a wonder worker, or a source of benevolent power, an intercessor, somebody who prays for you, a life lived often refusing material attachments or comforts, an ascetic, or possession of a special and revelatory relation to the holy. Indeed, even in our more secular society, we put people up on a pedestal who we think are particularly good models. Now, you may or may not debate that, but there is something within this human condition that we seem to put people up on a pedestal and look at people as saying they're worth copying, there's something about them. But it can also fall into a bit of looking at others and think that they're better than, grander than, more learned, richer, greater than us mere mortals. You sometimes hear it about the celebrities, you know. But perhaps this is a distortion of the idea of saints. Being a saint, at least in the popular imagination, has become about the unattainable, the otherworldly, perhaps even something we can't achieve or we don't deserve. We aren't good enough, we don't measure up. But I think this is actually in stark contrast to the readings from this morning, and I think to what it really means to be a saint. The first reading from 1 John says, "See what love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are." Present tense. Beloved, we are God's children now. What we will be has not yet been revealed. So we are God's children now. Beloved children of God. Not in heaven, not when we get our act together, but now. There's a hymn we sometimes sing, both here and Sunday morning at Open Table. I haven't done it for a while, but in one of the verses it says this: "Not in the dark of buildings confining, not in some heaven light years away, but here in this place a new light is shining. Now is the kingdom, now is the day." So does that mean I'm a saint? Well, my husband and my family might well beg to differ on occasion. Does that mean that you lot are saints? Well, I know you some of you well enough to make me wonder. But actually, isn't that the point? Each one of us, right now, are saints, children of God, whether we know it or not. And what we will be has not yet been revealed. Thomas Merton, the famous Cistercian monk, said it far more eloquently than I do in his book Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. And he says, "In Louisville, in the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the centre of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realisation that I loved all those people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation, in a special world, the world of renunciation and supposed holiness. This sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being human, a member of a race in which God himself became incarnate. As if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me, now I realise what we all are. And if only everybody could realise this. But it cannot be explained. There is no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. It cannot be explained. There is no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. It is a moment of realisation, an awakening, a fruit of our spiritual journey. It isn't something otherworldly, but actually embracing our very humanity and the humanity of others. In the more Catholic, but especially in the Eastern Christian traditions, many saints are honoured with icons. We've got one down here, which was a gift from the Bishop of Liverpool to the Open Table community. Now, images of the saints, and they were particularly images of the saints and what activities they were known for, often highly stylised and symbolic. Now, some people falsely believed, and that was certainly what I was taught, that devotees were worshipping the icon itself. That's actually not what they're doing. An icon is intended to be a window onto God. The icon is the window itself to looking through, and you catch a glimpse of the divine within the life of the person depicted in the icon. And through the saint, know something of God. So I'd like to challenge us to say that isn't that our calling too? To live in such a way that those around us and we ourselves catch a glimpse of the divine nature. What is it, though, within the lives of the saints, within the lives of the people in our communities that give us glimpses of the divine? Many of the stories of the official canonised saints are highly improbable. Kieran bought me a book a few years back, written by the Reverend Richard Coles, called Improbable Saints. He used to do a series of tweets where he'd do various ones. And I'm going to read two very short stories to give you a bit of a flavour. So there was Saint Coleman. He's the patron saint of those who go off in a huff. He was Bishop of Lindisfarne from 661 to 664 when he resigned because everybody decided to calculate the date of Easter using the First Ecumenical Council's method instead of his. He went to live on the island of Inishbofin in Galway, which very nearly 1,000 years later Cromwell turned into a penal colony for Catholic clergy. Now, the unfortunate prelate was tied to Bishop's Rock at low tide and drowned when the waters rose, and his feast day is the 18th of February. Or there's St. Jacqueline. She was famed as a virgin and hermit. She was an orphan who grew up in Rome towards the end of the 12th century. When she reached adulthood, she disguised herself as a monk and went to live in a hut in Greece. In due course, seeking greater seclusion, she moved to Sicily and lived in a tree, where she reprimanded Pope Innocent III for his wickedness. She is the patron saint of forgetfulness, and her feast day is the 31st of March. So these aren't your usual kind of stories, and they're highly improbable. But often, as you can see, these are stories of saints who were actually a real pain in the backside to their religious leaders of the day. And some of them were persecuted. Poor fellow was tied to a rock and left to drown. And I wonder what happened to St. Jacqueline after she gave Pope Innocent III a good talking to. But they may have been persecuted in their lifetimes, but they were later canonised. But there are tens of thousands of stories like this. And it isn't always so much the specific acts ascribed to the saint by myth and legend, but more often they're about standing up for right, for being authentic in the face of opposition, speaking truth to power, like St. Jacqueline, acts of social justice and care, facing down tyranny, and often in the face of great opposition to the point of being put to death. The stories of the saints are often not pretty bedtime stories, which make us feel all warm and fuzzy, but about facing the realities of the darkness of the misuse of power, oppression, hatred. They are often of people who had little power and privilege or public esteem, and or, like Francis of Assisi, those who gave those very things up to live a life with the poor. So these stories are actually about turning on its head the logic of our culture, human power games, perhaps even our evolutionary survival instincts. The Gospel reading brings this home. The Beatitudes, as they are called, are counterintuitive. They are the giving up of power. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely. Really? Blessed? Certainly not exclusively, but LGBTQIA folk can testify to inhabiting that space. And that's just from church authorities. In what ways are we blessed by this? The counterintuitive blessed are the peacemakers. We don't see that lived out in our day-to-day lives. So in what way are we blessed? It seems a foolishness. Yet in the lives of the saints, our own lives and in the life of Jesus, we glimpse the reality of God in the very foolishness of living with authenticity and working to create a world where the values of justice are evident. We are blessed because we live true to the call of that integrity. And we are blessed because others are called to live their own authenticity and integrity. And who knows, we might just change the world. But the cost is high. Many of you know that I found the work of Bishop John Shelby Spong of great inspiration over the years. He's a deeply controversial figure, and certainly not to everyone's taste. However, as is becoming something of a habit when I do these reflections, I'm going to close with a quote of his from a lecture he gave in 2016, shortly before he suffered a stroke, which, though he has recovered well, has taken away his ability to travel like he used to. He is a thoroughly improbable saint, but in his work I've caught a glimpse of the divine that continues to inspire and draw me onwards. So the bishop says, "When I experience God as life. And the God who is the source of life calls me to worship God by living fully. And the more fully I can live, the more I make God visible. And I experience God as the source of love, calling me to love, freeing me to love. And the more fully, the more wastefully I can give my love away, the more I believe I can make God visible. Thirdly, I believe I experience God as what Paul Tillich called the ground of all being. It is a cumbersome phrase. But if God is the ground of all being, the only way I can worship God is by having the courage to be everything that I am capable of being. And the more deeply and fully I can be all that I am, the more I can make God visible. And the reason I'm a Christian is that when I look at Jesus of Nazareth, I see a life fully lived. I see a love totally given. I see one who is free to be who he is in every moment of his life, even as he is being put to death. And so I make the affirmation, I see the reality of God in the humanity of Jesus. I also see the reality of God in the humanity of every other child of God, when they live fully, love wastefully, and dare to be all they can be. And this is the mission of my Christian faith. It is not to make you religious. God knows we've got enough religious people in the world. The purpose of the Christian faith is to call you to be whole, to call you into the fullness of life, to call you into the capacity to love and to give your life away in love, to call you to the courage to be all that you can be. And so, my fellow band of thoroughly improbable saints, may we live fully, love wastefully, and be all that we can be, liberating others to do the same by being living icons to the light that shines within each of us. And what we will be has not yet been revealed.